On today's episode, I thought we would go back to SPfx and build another SPfx web part because I thought that'd be fun. And I was thinking about all the really cool stuff we used to build in the script editor web part. But as we all know, the script edited web part is kind of going the way of the dodo and is no longer available in modern sites. And my guess is pretty soon it won't be available at all. So we really need another way to keep going with, or to keep building really cool sort of web parts that we used to always build. Now, just let me grab a quick drink of coffee here. Got myself a cappuccino that I've made with my own cappuccino machine. I suggest that you do the same as well. Or get yourself a coffee or a tea or a glass of water or whatever. Whatever is your poison, because over the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, we're going to be going through this example that I've got on the screen right now. And I thought it'd be really neat to make a must-read documents web part, which is, you know, something we would have done in script editor web part back in the day. And so this is it here running, and you can see we've got a few documents in document library, and when we hover over them, we get this cool little button effect, and when we click on them, the document opens. So this is the web part we're going to be building today, and I'm going to be building in SPfx. I'm going to be using SPfx framework or SharePoint framework web parts, and JavaScript and TypeScript and that kind of stuff. Now, if you haven't done any SPfx before, my suggestion is you go back and watch my previous two videos. Now, why I'm saying that is because I'm going to be using a lot of parts from those videos in this video, and I'm not going to be covering that ground again. So if you know, if I seem like I'm jumping ahead a little bit in parts of the video, it's only because these are bits that I've already covered and shown you how to do. So just to make this video as sort of compressed and get to the point as quick as possible, I'm just going to say, go back and watch those videos and then come back to this video. Otherwise, just watch this video and enjoy, and then go back and watch them again later. Do whatever you like. But that's my recommendation. Okay, so like I said, this is our web part, and first thing we will want to do is obviously build our project, and I have it done. My project built right here. So let me just flip over to Visual Studio Code, and I've called my web part must read docs web part. Now, if you watched the previous video, you'll know there's a few parts that we added. So this is just a default web part that we get when we generate our project using Node Package Manager. Now, the additional parts that we added, well, the first part here is I've just commented the section, and we need to add this because we are going to be using these, I guess, libraries in our web part. And we need this HTTP client, and we've also created these other two structures here that we will use to store our data that is returned from SharePoint in, and we're defining the type of array here, or the type of record that's stored within each cell of the array. And this is, as I'm learning sort of more about TypeScript, this is a requirement to sort of stop TypeScript from moaning about that you don't have a, you haven't defined what that particular list item is. So we're doing that here. Now, I've already sort of gone ahead and done some extra fields in our list item, but I'll cover that in a sec. Like in our previous example, we added these two additional functions, render list and get list data. And these contain our two sort of methods that we're going to use to grab our data from SharePoint and then display it in our web part. Now, this last method here, render, this will already be here in your web part project. And this line here, this DOM element in it, HTML, is the actual missing semicolon. The actual, this will be in your project already. And this is where we put our code, where our web part starts rendering, and we can call any additional methods that we may create. We do all this from within render, and everything else will just be default. So we're not using anything else. We're not using property panes or anything for this particular example. This is something you can build on later. And in fact, if you watch the original video, I do go into property panes. So you could incorporate the property pane inside of this web part that we're about to build if you wanted to make it a little bit more configurable. But we're not going to do this in this example. We're just going to sort of hard code as much as possible, just so you're getting an understanding of how this works rather than something that you may actually deploy. Although I don't see any reason why you wouldn't deploy this into production. Anyway, besides that, let's continue on. So in this function here, this is where we're initially calling our REST web service, our SharePoint REST web service. And you will want to duplicate this function exactly how I've got it here. So maybe hit pause on the video right now and just type this in exact, except for this particular line here, which is our actual REST endpoint string. And this equates to the SharePoint REST endpoint that we're calling. Now you might notice that we're using getByTitle again, which is, if you look at the documentation on the SharePoint REST endpoints, it's usually not referred to as a document REST endpoint. It's always referred to as a list endpoint. Now, if you've been working with SharePoint for many years, you'll realize that SharePoint document libraries and SharePoint lists are actually very, very similar, and they're pretty much the same thing, except for the fact of, obviously, a document library stores documents where a list doesn't necessarily store documents. But apart from that, they're pretty much exactly the same structure. And the web service, most of the web services will work across both of these two types of SharePoint elements. Now we're going to use the getByTitle, and instead of our list name, we're putting our document library name here in the quotes. So I've used a document library called docs, and there's a little bit different here, a little bit additional information here. But if I go to our SharePoint site, now let me flip our capture back over to here, and I just go site contents. Let me quickly show you the document library that I've created. I've added an additional column called it's a choice column, and I've added three different values that can be set here: low, medium, mid, or high. Medium, medium, high, low. And this is just a priority that can be set when a document is placed inside of this document library. Now the idea around this is, because we're creating a web part of must-read documents, we want to also set the priority on each document so people can sort of get an idea on what is the document they should be reading. Whatever the document priority has been set, we are setting that particular color as the background for that document. So it makes it stand out, and then it's allowing for the say the site owner or the project manager or whoever runs this particular SharePoint site to be able to designate what files are have a higher priority to read. So as a user, I can come to the site and go, oh, that document's read, I need to read that document. You could put more explanation in here, or like a little legend or something, but for this example, I've just left it as a background color because I think that's probably clear enough to the user that this is an sort of priority one document, and I need to read that first. These are style choices. You can choose something different in your particular web part, but this is what I've gone for. So if we go back to our code, In our web part, we want to display because we want to display hyperlinks to our document, we need to grab a couple additional fields from the SharePoint document library. We need the file name for one, and we also need the file path. Now, the response back from this particular web service, these two fields are actually stored in records within the JSON response back. So we get an array, and inside of that array we've got records for each document, and in that record we've got all the metadata is returned back from each document. Now within that, these particular fields are also, they're not just strings that are returned back, they're records. So we have to in our web service call, we have to define this a little bit differently, and we do this with the select and expand parameter in our URI or our web service call. And when we're defining the actual list item, when we're defining our structure, we also have to make these a record so we can access them correctly. And inside of here, we need to define what fields within that record that we want to display. So in field value as text, we want to display the file ref, which is our file path. And under the file record, we want to display the name, and they're both strings, but we need to get to them through these two record values that are returned back from the web service. Now, that's pretty much our get list data. So this is really essentially what we need to get our response back from SharePoint. But our web part is not rendering anything. So the first thing we want to do here is just to create our HTML container that we're going to use to push all of our web part content in. And I'm just going to use a div here. Call that SP list container. And we just close that div. Because we're going to be using this render list method to push all of our container data in here, or container content, I should say, or create all of our content, we will call that method. So render list. Oh. Okay. So what that'll do is when this web part executes, it will create this DOM element inside of our web part called list container, SP list container. It'll create that div, and it's just empty at the moment. And then the last thing it does is calls render list. So what does render list do? Render list is calling get list data. And with the response, it executes this blind function. So what does get list data do? Get list data calls our web service and responds back to render list with this response JSON object called response, and it returns that back to render list. So response contains all of our data from our web service call, or our SharePoint REST web service call. So this is where we want to create our content based on response. So what do we want to do here? So I guess the first thing we want to do is create a HTML variable. And this is just going to be string. Within here, let's initialize, well, let's create our first line of HTML here. I'm just going to paste that in because I'm lazy and I don't want to type it all. We're creating our HTML variable, and we're setting it to this initial div. Well, as you can see, we've just got an opening div. So this is the start of our string, and we've got some styling here that I've set. And this is just standard SharePoint styling. You can copy what I've got here, or you can mess around and put your own values in. But you can see this is our first div, must read documents, which equates to that heading we saw. And then the next line here is our div, our opening div tag that is going to be the div tag that we're going to place everything into. So our next line of code will be our loop. Within this loop, we're building our HTML variable. So when item priority equals high, we want to add to our HTML variable. In here, we're going to add a div tag. And inside of our div tag, we want to do a href tag because we want to insert a link, or we want to create a link to our document. And in here, we're defining the actual link to the ahref tag as the item field value as text file ref. And remember this value is our path. And then we want to close that ahref tag, and inside we want to show our file name, and then close the a tag. And then we're closing the div tag. So that's pretty much how we define a line of, how we define that line inside of our web part. And that is if it's priority high. If it's not priority tag, we want to check again. Is it priority medium? If it is, display the link again. Else if, because we've only got 3 conditions, we know that the last condition will be what needs to run. And let's just copy this line again. So the last thing we want to do outside of our loop. So remember, this is our loop is here. This is where the loop function ends. So under that, we want to add to our HTML. And all we want to do here is close the div tag. So we're closing that div tag that we created here. That gives us our HTML container closed off and completed. So the last thing we want to do is just set a constant. And we'll just call that list container. And it's of type element. We want that to be equal to this DOM element query selector. Now that is effectively creating a pointer to the element inside of our web part that has that particular name. So this function or this method here will query our DOM document or the web page that we're rendering this to, and look for this particular ID, this container with this ID defined, and it creates this pointer to it. So now we have pointed to that particular container, and we just want to list containers inner HTML will be equal to our HTML variable. Let's take a look at this web part now and see where we're at as how this looks. All right, let's now package the solution. And again, we do this exactly how we always do it. Let me go back to our SharePoint site. And here is our app catalog. And I'm just going to drag over and paste our package that we just compiled. Now again, I've shown these steps in the previous 2 videos. So if you're not entirely sure what I'm doing here, watch my previous 2 videos. I explain in detail how to deploy a package to SharePoint. But effectively, well, in a nutshell, those 2 commands that I run, let me flip back. Those 2 commands that I run, the bundle --ship and package solution --ship, are the 2 functions, or the 2 commands, I should say, sorry, that create our package file that lives under the SharePoint /solution folder. So this file here is what we need to deploy to SharePoint. Let's go back to our SharePoint screen. Let's click deploy. And that's our web part deployed. If I hit refresh, now I've got my web part displaying. You can see we've got some styling that we've added, but it doesn't look as pretty as what I initially showed you in this video, right? It's just, we can see some hyperlinks here, not much else. I click on them. Yes, it opens the document, but I don't see any coloring based on what priority. I'm just seeing the links rendered to the screen. So we need to add some additional HTML to get that working, or additional HTML and CSS. So let's go back to our project. And let's take a look here. So under our render, so this is, again, remember, and I keep reiterating this, this is the standard method that renders, it's the first one that runs when we when we refresh our page. So this establishes what is inside of our web part. So what we want to do, what we want to render in here is some styling, because we want to style up this particular web part, right? So I'm going to do that through a style tag. Oh. Helps if I can type. In here, we're going to add some classes that we can add to our web part elements. So let's take a look at what we want to do here. So the first class I'm going to add is a doc called doc style must read. I'm going to make sure these classes are, because I'm adding them to the page, I want to make sure that they're not anything sort of generic, and they may conflict with some other styles that SharePoint is by default setting. Remember, these are cascading style sheets, so they're just adding to each other as you add more styles to the page. So make sure that your naming on these classes is quite unique to your web part. Just call that must read, and under here, I'm going to set some properties. Now, I'm just going to paste in some properties that I've already preset. Now, I'll just go through these quickly. I've got a border radius here of 4 pixels. I've got a width of fit content, so I want our div to just be the size of whatever's inside of it, but I will add some padding around. So inside of our div, we're going to have some padding, and then we've got a margin bottom, which is going to sort of push our properties, our divs, going to give a little bit of spacing between our divs. I want to set the font weight to bold, and I'm going to put a little shadow, like a drop shadow, on our elements. Now, I have always gotten rubbish from my colleagues because I've always loved putting drop shadows and stuff. If you like drop shadows too, add a drop shadow to this. If you don't like your drop shadows, then you don't have to put the drop shadow on this container. But I like drop shadows, so I'm putting that on there. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a moment too, because I want an additional rollover or hover effect on those particular links. So let's just leave that there for now, and you'll see why I've done that. In here, we want to add another style or another class. And this is cascading again off the doc style must read, but I'm going to add the A tag to it. And what this is in CSS, this is how we say for all our A tags underneath our doc style must read. So anything that has a class of doc style must read, and any A tag, sorry, under any element that is been classed as a doc style must read will be styled in this way. And we just want to make our color that particular color, which is sort of like a dark gray. So the next class we want to define is, well, let's just grab all three of these because they're all pretty similar. Right. So here we're defining three different classes: back red, back yellow, and back green. And all this class does is define a black background color as this particular color. So this is the red that I've chosen. This is the hex value of the red that I liked. This is the yellow that I liked, and that's the green that I liked. So these classes will just define a background color, nothing else. And the last class I want to define here is our doc style must read hover. Now this is why I've got box shadow or the drop shadow on that particular style element, is because I want to have a hover effect where when I hover over my hyperlink, I actually want it I want the drop shadow to go away. And what that sort of does is it makes it look like a button or a container that's pushing in. So the hover effect when you roll over will make it look like this button is pushing into the page. And I just like that effect, so this is what I'm adding to it. As you can see, I'm also setting a background color for the hover effect, and that will just sort of change that cell to a gray color. So whatever color it is, red, yellow, or green, it'll change it to gray when I hover my mouse button over it, this is just the styling that I preferred and what I ended up settling on. If you're a sort of style guru, my guess is you're going to do something a lot better than what I've done here, but at least this is showing you now the basics on how to do that. So if we go up, we need to apply these styles, or apply these classes, I should say, to our elements. Under our div, we want to add a class, and under the class, we want to add our doc style. What is this? It's this particular class here we want. So let me just copy that and paste that. Now we want to add another class to this. Well, let's first just add this to all of our elements, because we want all three of our elements here to have this particular class, or like this class to it, or this styling to it. But we want to add something different to each one as well, because when it's high, for example, we want the background to be red. So we need to add another class back red to this element. When it's medium, we want that to be yellow. And when it's green, well, we want that to be green. Okay, so that's our styling pretty much set up. So let's save that. Again, we need to compile it. And package. Let's go to SharePoint. All right, might need another sip of coffee. I'm ready. Let's deploy, and we can just keep writing over our existing package here. Deploy that. If I hit refresh, and now we've got our web part finished and styled up exactly how I wanted it. So this is the effect I was talking about here. If we roll over, you can see you get this neat CSS effect where the buttons actually push in to the screen or push in when you hover over them. And like I said, I liked that effect. Let's just quickly add another document to this web part to show you that it is working correctly. So if I go site contents, go to our docs, and if I go new Word document, this is another test. Save as Giles, this is called document 5. All right, we've got a document 5 now. If I go in and check properties on that, I can change its priority, and let's make it another priority high document. Go back to home, and we can see our new document that we've published into our document library, and it is formatted as a must-read high priority document because that's what we set it in our document library. Hey, hit the like button if you liked this video, comment something in the comments section below, and of course subscribe to stay up to date with all my latest videos. I thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.